Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing Rita Pangalangan. Rita Pangalangan was recently convicted for the murder of her 13-year-old daughter, Cristina. Cristina had cerebral palsy. 4 years ago, Cristina was left in a hot car. Cristina was in the car for over 5 hours in the extreme heat and ultimately passed away. It was reported that Rita Pangalangan and Larry King Jr. were using methamphetamine at that time and ultimately didn't come back to check on her except for once, about an hour after they put her in the car. And before we get started, I do want to remind you I have not met either one of the defendants in this case. These are purely my opinions based on publicly available information, and this is not any sort of formal psychological evaluation. I also want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. So what we're going to look at first is her body language during the verdict being read.
We, the jury, in the above caption, on the charge of murder of Cristina and Pangalangan, find the defendant guilty. Oh my God! Oh my God!
So as you can hear, she's clearly very distressed. Not exactly shocking given the fact that she's being found guilty of murder. We're going to keep watching, and there is a purpose to all this. We are going to compare her behavior now to after the sentencing. But for now, let's just keep watching.
We, the jury, in the above caption case, on the charge of great bodily injury of a child, we find the defendant guilty. Oh my God. We, the jury, in the above caption case, on the charge of criminal conspiracy, find the defendant not guilty.
And as you can see, her eyebrows are raised as they're saying this. I think she's actually shocked. I think that it's very possible she didn't think that she was actually going to be convicted of this.
Find the defendant not guilty. And it's signed by the foreperson.
Yes.
Signed by the
No, you don't need to call the name of the foreperson. Signed by the foreperson. Do
signed
not.
by the foreperson.
Yes.
So clearly she has a very physical, very visceral reaction to this. If you watch a lot of trials and you see people getting convicted, everybody's got a different way of handling it. Hers is a little bit more extreme than we typically see for most people. And I don't know if it's because she's really surprised by it. I don't know if it's that she wants to put on and make sure that the judge knows how much she feels about it. I don't know if that she wants people to feel guilty about the fact that she's been convicted. It's interesting. She's looking back in the gallery, I presume maybe to a family member or something like that, saying, "I'm so sorry," if you watch right here.
Yes.
Signed by the
No, you don't need to call the name of the foreperson. Signed by the foreperson. Do
signed
not.
by the foreperson.
Yes. Pangalangan.
You want me to stand or just?
Just juror numbers stand individually and pose the questions to them. Is this your verdict, and it's still your verdict?
So she is putting on a lot of body language when she does this. She is showing off a lot about how she feels. And what I wonder, though, is she doing this for the purpose of the jury because she wants them to feel bad for convicting her? Is she doing this as a way? Is this just that she really genuinely feels so much that she just has to show it? You know, we'll continue to talk about this, but her body language is very big. It is very broad for even a situation like this.
Numbers, yes.
Madam Foreperson, jury number 3. Is this your verdict?
So the fact she's drinking water, not shocking. Your mouth can dry up a lot when you're feeling really anxious or scared.
9. Is this your verdict?
Yes.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes.
Jury number 58. Is this your verdict? Yes. Is it still your verdict? Yes. Jury number 450.
And it's interesting. Some of the facial expressions she shows we associate more with physical pain than we do with sadness per se. And that's what's so unusual about how she presents, is that we see people that look shocked, that look sad and all of those, but she looks like she's physically feeling it in a painful way.
Is this your verdict? Yes. Is it still your verdict? Yes. Jury number 450. Is this your verdict? Yes. Is it still your verdict?
As I pointed out, she does some strange things with her tongue. She did this during the other parts of the trial too. I'm not going to bother showing them because it looks exactly the same. But she often licks her lips. She often sticks her tongue out. I don't know if this is a dental issue. From a psychological standpoint, from a body language standpoint, it can have to do with anxiety or stress, but she does it so much. It's sort of unusual in that sense.
Your 422. Is this your verdict?
Yes.
Is this still your verdict?
Yes.
And juror number 253.
The evidence was appropriately placed before them for their consideration. They have reached a verdict that is unanimous, and the court respectfully denies each motion made by.
One thing that's odd about her body language is how quickly she can go between sort of hysterics to looking okay, as you can see right here.
That is unanimous, and the court respectfully denies each motion made by each defendant.
And would require this time.
I'm not saying that they necessarily are. At times they appear to be somewhat superficial. I do wonder if there's a certain level of performance to these emotions. The purpose of that being maybe so that the judge will be more lenient, maybe to affect how people feel. I'm not really sure what her motivations could be, and I could be totally off base about that. This may be just exactly how she always is. Maybe she feels things this intensely. But it's very interesting how quickly she can shift back and forth between the intensity of being upset to looking a little bit more stable in that way.
Yes, sir. And court likewise denies a motion for new trial as to each defendant.
I'm going to show you a little bit of what she's like when she's incarcerated before the trial. There's no audio to this clip, but I wanted you to see a bit of her body language then too. As you can see, it's very similar. The same sort of level of distress. Saying, oh my God. It looks almost exactly the same as it did when she was read the verdict. And so what we're seeing is someone who has the tendency to have very intense, very extreme reactions. And so, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing her for that per se, but it's just interesting because for people who see a lot of different types of people being incarcerated, people in prison, people going through convictions and all of that, her behavior and her response tends to be a bit extreme. It would be less unusual to see this behavior during the initial arrest, because that can happen when people are trying to grapple with the idea they've been accused of these kinds of things, that they're going to have to go to trial, that their daughter has died. Those sorts of issues can bring this up for people early on, but this is 4 years later, and that's why the intensity of emotion is a little bit surprising. Now we're going to watch some of Rita Pangalangan during her sentencing.
Person there on that day, when you all were on this drug binge, at least as described by.
So she's saying no, she's disagreeing with the fact they were on a drug binge. I'm going to go back and then we're going to watch where that connects next.
We're on this drug binge, at least as described by Mr. King.
And then he says, as described by Mr. King. So she stopped protesting, looks over at him because Larry King Jr. is over on that side. And she's puffing her cheeks out. This is what we do when we feel frustrated, when we feel exasperated, when we feel angry. So I don't think that she's particularly happy with his testimony.
And I've said it before, the people we see in court are typically not the people that were out on the streets doing the things that landed them in court. And I've seen it time and time again. Was it methamphetamine we're dealing with? Yeah, but for methamphetamine and dealing with it, neither of the two of you would be here. But
you see her shaking her head no. And it seems like she's in denial about the role that methamphetamine played in this, or at least wants to appear that way as Judge Clifton Newman talks about this.
Those were decisions that you all made.
I divorced my first husband because he was an addict.
Mm-hmm.
I do not do drugs. I never did drugs. It was in my brain that weekend, and I have told my lawyer that several times. But I don't do drugs, and I wish back then I would have taken a hair follicle test or something to show me that drugs was not a part of my life.
So she's emphasizing how much she did not use drugs, that there was drugs in her drink or something that weekend. Okay, so this, unfortunately, is something that we see with people who have used substances. Obviously, I can't say whether or not she did. It seems to be that other people have testified and have accused her of using methamphetamine during that time. But one thing I do know is that when you're working with people that have abused substances, unfortunately, you oftentimes cannot trust what they say, particularly when it comes to accountability. So the fact that she says this, and the fact that she says it emphatically, doesn't necessarily come across as very convincing just because of the history we're talking about. And because for anybody who has been around people using these kinds of substances, these are the kinds of things that you might hear.
Yeah, that makes you having less an excuse, less justification. Your mind wasn't screwed up as you're telling us now. Yeah. A mother who's not under the influence would leave their child in a car under those circumstances for 5-6 hours, who knew the child was in the car and knew the child had been in the car for that period of time, and drive off and leave the child. How could you?
So for anybody who doesn't know who Judge Clifton Newman is, he was also the judge in the Alec Murdaugh case. He's just one of my favorites to watch. He's sharp as a tack, and he always has the right things to say.
Committed to the State Department of Correction for a period of 37 years on murder, 20 years on great bodily injury. Sentences will run concurrent, and you'll receive credit for time served. Do we have the number of days of credit that they're entitled to?
39.
Receive credit for 39 days. The lawyers?
And so after this, the distress looks very different. So now she's been sentenced. There's very little else she can do. It doesn't seem that she is reacting with the same level of severity now that she actually knows how long she's going to be going to prison for, which is 37 years plus another 20, if I understood right, so 57 years basically. So it does make me wonder if part of why she had such a strong reaction before was hoping that the judge would be kinder in terms of his sentencing. But as you can see, she does still appear to be sad, but the level of intensity that she's reacting with is quite different.
Does anyone know?
So when we look back at her body language over this, and we look at how strongly she reacted, it is hard to imagine that maybe there wasn't part of that that is somewhat performative. Maybe it's that she's somebody who just feels an immense amount of distress all the time, because as we saw, even when she was incarcerated, even when she was in prison, she also showed a tremendous amount of distress there. So maybe she's somebody that is in pain. Maybe she is somebody that feels uncomfortable. But there's also the possibility that some degree of her behavior was somewhat performative, maybe hoping that the judge would be lighter on her sentence. Because when you hear her talk, she continues to deny that she's ever had problems with meth. Hopefully watching this video has helped you better understand some of her body language. And if you have any other current cases that you're interested in, please let me know in the comments below. Last thing before we get finished up, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.